Today we are going to focus our tutorial on narrative therapy, and I thought we could approach this lesson experientially with a bit of a role play. First, however, let's start by talking about what you know about narrative therapy.
Therapy that is process-centered on a story or narrative.
In many ways, this is exactly what is Tuan. However, unlike many therapeutic approaches, therapy is a collaborative approach to processing, where the client is seen as the expert of their own lives.
God help me if I am supposed to be the expert of anyone's life.
One of the other major differences that narrative therapy has with other approaches is it views the problem as separate to the person. The problem is itself is the problem, not something the person is doing wrong.
Okay, now I am getting more hopeful.
The narrative therapeutic approach was developed largely by Australian social worker Michael White and David Epston of New Zealand. According to White and Epston, a narrative approach views problems as separate from people and assumes people as having many skills, abilities, values, commitments, beliefs, and competencies that will assist them to change the relationship they are having with the problem in their lives. So how do you think narrative therapists deal with problems?
Listen to the client's story and find common threads and issues to work with.
Again, this is one way to describe what they do. Actually, what I am thinking is that this is probably a good time to do a bit of a role play. Allison, please, will you be my role play assistant? I will be going through this in more of an informative way, and I won't be asking you to share anything personal with the group. The way we sit in relation to each other and the board is called positioning. I always explain that with narrative therapy, there are three of us in this process: myself, Allison, the client, and the whiteboard on which we can externalize some of the issues that come up, if that is okay at the time for Allison. The way to open, begin, and focus a narrative-based session is to ask respectful, non-leading, open-ended questions with a genuine sense of curiosity. It is particularly important to be curious about words and ideas that seem important, as indicated by gestures, tonality, and body language. Let's imagine Allison has come to see me because she has such a strong feeling of distrust and dislike for her sister's husband that it's beginning to impact their very close relationship. During Allison's narrative, one of the first things that pops out to me is when Allison says, "He's a pig and I hate him." At this point, I ask if she would mind us using the whiteboard on which to write about Roger. To remind you, this part of the process is called externalizing. In externalizing Roger as the problem is no longer Susan's family relationships, but an external problem we have named Roger the Dodger. I ask Allison if I may write down some of the things she is talking about and ask with a non-judgmental curiosity what she means when she says, "He's a pig and I hate him." Allison, who is being played by Susan, begins. For a start, she says,
He stinks. I can't stand the way he smells. Every time we meet, we have to hug and kiss each other, and no matter how hard I try to turn my cheek, he seems to manage to plant a wet, slimy kiss straight on my lips. I always try to not sit next to him at the dinner table, but somehow he always manages to sit next to me. As such, I have taken to putting one finger in my ear so I don't have to listen to him slurping down his beer, burping loudly and masticating, and I use that word deliberately. His food. He just revolts me. I don't really know what hating him means, but it feels like a body reaction of pure revulsion.
By this time, I have written on one side of the board words like invades personal space, eats loudly and with his mouth open, and is insensitive to his impact on others. I ask Allison if those words are right for her, and she says yes, especially the invading my personal space. I ask her how else he invades her space.
And as the way he looks at me, sometimes I feel like giving him an uppercut under the chin to remind him that my eyes are not in the same place as my boobs.
I wrote sleazy on the board. Susan said we can add very to that comment, so we do. Allison's whole demeanor changed, and at that point, she became obviously anxious and distressed. Most of all, I feel this real sense of shame and betrayal for the way Roger is relating to me when I'm not doing anything at all to encourage it. I write shame, betrayal, and fear on the board. I ask if Allison is afraid her sister will find out and somehow blame her. It's like we've hit the crux of the matter, and Allison says, "This is my biggest fear, and I would be just devastated if that happened." In a real session, I would validate Susan's position, react with genuine compassion and understanding to her revelation, and ask Susan lots more questions before moving on. For the sake of brevity, I will move on to the next stage of the narrative process, a technique called repositioning. In repositioning, the shame, sense of deception, guilt, irritation, hate, and repulsion Susan feels about Roger are no longer the problem. The problem is now quite clearly outside of Allison, named by us as Roger the Dodger. The next step we would employ is called personal agency. On the side of the board not yet written on, I would encourage Susan to write about her personal agency, her skills, abilities, values, commitments, beliefs, and competencies that will assist them to change her, to change the relationship she is having with the problems in her life. Susan wrote words like loyalty, honesty, kindness, speaking the truth, standing up for herself, and not allowing herself to be sexually harassed. Michael White describes this next part of the process of looking in the reflecting pond, looking at how the problem Roger the Dodger and her behavior around him fits with her personal agency. Quite simply, they do not. It is an overwhelming task to just jump in and change all of her behaviors so that they line up with her personal agency. But piece by piece, we can begin to address this problem and change the deep sense of shame, betrayal, and guilt Susan is feeling. Susan's homework for this week is to reach out and shake Roger's hand, rather than allowing him to plant an unwanted kiss on her lips. She is also going to ask her mother and father